I love podcasting. It's my favorite form of long form content. And I'm 261 episodes into digital marketing therapy, and I've been doing it for years. But one of the things that I'm working on doing more of is guesting on other people's podcasts and truly collaborating with them, getting in front of their audience, sharing my information and wisdom and knowledge and stories with their audience to provide value. So I have guests on my podcast almost every single week. I'm starting to guest more on other people's podcasts, and I thought maybe you might want to do it too. So today I have a very special guest who that's what he does. He helps people pitch and get in front of podcasts, find the right podcast, and be guests on their show. So even if you're not ready to start your own podcast, totally fine. Guesting is a great way to jump in, learn more, and be a part of somebody else's community. Dustin Riechmann is a serial entrepreneur and the founder of 7-Figure Leap Coaching. He specializes in helping mission-driven experts build 7-figure brands by telling their story. He's here to share his 5-step framework for guesting on podcasts with you so that you can start to work through getting out there, having conversations, meeting more people, and more importantly, getting more eyeballs and visibility on the incredible impact that you're doing at your organization. So I hope that you'll give this episode a listen. But before we get into it, it is brought to you by our June freebie. We have a quiz keyed up for you to help you really understand if you're ready to start collaborating. Is it time to start jumping into collaborations head on and really using that to grow your reach, your impact, your connections, your network? Or do you need to maybe get some things in line and get ready to go before you start to jump in and reaching out for collaborations in general, not just in podcasting? So take the quiz. It's really easy, and you'll get your results that will give you some tips and resources for things that you can do moving forward. You can find it in all of our other freebies at thefirstclick.net/resources. I hope you'll take this quiz and really kind of figure out how you can thoughtfully jump into collaborations, get creative with them, and just figure out your time capacity and how it all aligns with your goals. So again, you can find that at thefirstclick.net/resources. Let's get into the episode. You're listening to the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern. Each month, we dive deep into a digital marketing or fundraising strategy that you can implement in your organization. Each week, you'll hear from guest experts, nonprofits, and myself on best practices, tips, and resources to help you raise more money online and reach your organizational goals. Hey friends, please join me in welcoming Dustin Riechmann to the podcast. Dustin, thanks for being here today.
Hey, Sammy, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we're talking about podcasting today, which obviously I'm a fan of because we've got 200, and this is episode 261 of the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. But before we kind of jump into partnerships and how podcasting can help your organization, kind of why do you love podcasting as a tool?
Yeah, so I focus specifically on podcast guesting, so kind of being on this side of the mic, and I did that pretty much exclusively for 3 years and built 2 brands with it and have helped a bunch of other people with it. And now I also host. So I think now I can actually talk about both sides of the mic, but regardless of which side you're on, I think there's lots and lots and lots of special and unique things about the podcasting format and like just this way of connecting that, for one, it's a really good relationship builder. I always say it's like the best tool for building relationships at scale. I think it's also really valuable in the sense that it's long form and educational content. And so I love that aspect of it. I also love that it's easy, to be honest, like to show up and talk about the things that you love to talk about and showcase your case studies or your organization. That's fun and it's easy, right? Compared to having to travel and be on a physical stage or produce a really high-end YouTube educational piece of content. So I think there's a lot of like practical reasons it's really good. And then I'd say my favorite reason for podcasting and why I think it's going to continue to grow and not shrink as a medium is just the human-to-human connection. Like even though we're on Zoom or a different platform, we're on a virtual video. Sammy and I are really able to connect, and then I'm really able to connect with your audience. And I think that's unique. And I think in an age of emerging AI and all the things that the implications that come with that, I think having real people talking about real stories and having real connection is really, really important. And so I think podcasting is actually going to grow in importance over time.
Yeah, and you see that too because like a lot of platforms are, I mean, like YouTube, for example, is putting a lot of effort behind podcasting and having that as part of their platform. Spotify has done that also. I mean, like you see more and more of these big companies, catering to podcasting as well, not shrinking away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was like lots of weird things happened during the COVID years, but
Yeah.
there was a big spike in quote unquote podcasting because a lot of people were stuck at home. Was like, oh, I'm going to make a podcast, and then of course there was a lot of those people only recorded one episode, and then so there was a decline. And so in the headlines, a lot of people saw like podcasting is dying. There's always those headlines, but I think if you take out that noise from the signal, it's actually definitely growing. And if anything, there's more and more kind of corporate investment, and it's being taken more seriously by large companies. But also, there's still tons of room for creators and nonprofits and people who have a message and a mission behind what they're doing. I just think this is just a wonderful format and an opportunity to get that message out in a real way.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and this month is all about collaboration. And so that's why I was really excited to have you on, because we are talking about guesting, which makes it even easier. So if you're like, I want to get into the world of podcasting, but I'm not ready to start my own, because there are so many out there in a wide variety, guest podcasting, like being a guest on other people's podcasts, is a great, easy lift and great visibility. So kind of, could you talk a little bit more about kind of how you've used guesting to kind of grow the businesses you've done, and kind of how you work with people on helping them do the same to get more visibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of a weird and fun little niche that I've carved out in the online marketing space. But the way I got into it is completely happenstance. So basically, I was a partner in an e-commerce company called Fire Creek Snacks, and for several years we were growing that with traditional online marketing, and actually got big into like wholesale and brick and mortar. So we were doing trade shows and doing a lot of traveling and a lot of sampling, because the whole company was like a better for you meat stick, basically, right? Like a healthy Slim Jim is probably the easier way for most people to understand what we were producing. And that was going great. And I was literally driving from St. Louis to Chicago for a trade show in March 2020. And when I almost got to Chicago, I got a phone call that said, hey, the trade show is canceled. I'm like, oh man, what's going on? And so then I come home and of course everything's canceled. And so we had to figure out a different way to market that brand. And I always enjoyed listening to podcasts. I'd never hosted one or been on one, but I'm like, you know what the heck, I'll try it. So I reached out to my very first podcast host and said, hey, I've got this story about this business partnership and how we've taken this like local brand and we've brought it online. And I think it's pretty compelling. I think it's even more compelling now because of COVID. There's a lot of local businesses who need to start selling online. So it's pretty timely. I was able to tie the story to that event. I got on a pretty large podcast called The Side Hustle Show with Nick Loper. And that was the very first show in summer 2020. So that's how I got into this world. I realized I loved it. I enjoyed it. We made some sales. I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. And so I just started doing that on repeat and started looking for other opportunities to tell the Fire Creek story. And so I did that for 6 months, just focused entirely on that brand. And then, funny thing happens when you start doing stuff in public is people start noticing, and I started getting inbound requests like, hey, can you coach me? Can you help me with this? I think podcast guesting could help my business. And so I just started doing one-off coaching, and that's evolved to the point now, several years later, where Fire Creek Snacks became a 7-figure brand. And then like this whole coaching business came out of it about 18 months ago. It became an official thing. And about 6 months ago, actually rebranded in the 7-figure leap. And so that's really our focus now, is we work primarily with mission-driven entrepreneurs, but other industry leaders and nonprofit leaders certainly as well. And we help them use podcast guesting as a marketing channel to grow their business or their nonprofit. And so, I'm happy to talk about like the framework or, like how we work with people through this process to be really effective. But like, that's my own story of these two brands were completely built on the guesting side of the mic. And only about 3 or 4 months ago did I actually start my own podcast. And I highly recommend for people to take that path. Like, you don't need to take 3 years, but keep in mind, I was doing two different brands. So I had a protracted journey. But, I think doing guesting for a while to really dial in your messaging, get your stories, figure out who you want to talk to and what you want to talk about, then take on the commitment. As Sammy knows, it's a big commitment to own a show and produce a show. And it's a lot harder than simply showing up and being a guest and talking about the things you love to talk about in front of an audience that's already been grown, right? So anyway, that's my own story on podcast guesting, and I hope other people hear that. I think the right way to enter the podcasting world is through the guesting side of the mic initially, and then add hosting as appropriate.
I love too that you said that you were approaching other podcasts to tell the story of how you created your product and your brand. It wasn't a pitch to, hey, I need to sell a product. I think that my personal opinion, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that was probably what helped you with that success, was that I'm here just to share a story and inspire people. That connection that you make through the podcast with the audience is what's going to get them to be like, oh, I want to look into that brand and I want to see what that's all about. Or I think that's kind of cool, as opposed to like a hard pitch on, like, you don't want to go on somebody's podcast and be like, hey, donate to our organization. You win them over with the story and encourage them to engage more, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't ever pitch anything directly other than maybe a free gift or, some sort of like, if you like this topic and you want to go deeper, here's like a free next step. But yeah, never pitch anything directly. Everything's very story based. And I would say it's going to be a combination of like just pure storytelling. Like, hey, here's my story, or here's a client story, or here's a belief I have and why I have it. And those sort of things. I think that with the combination of education is like the most important, or it's the most powerful combo. So like a personal story, really leading with empathy and like letting people know, like being vulnerable and transparent and telling something about yourself that connects with people, and then backing that up with like authority, meaning, and I know stuff, right? Like, here's how I got into this. This is why it's important to me. But then also here's like something I can teach you. So that's where you might showcase your framework or the work that your organization does in the community, and educate people about not only why, but how that works. And then you kind of get that powerful 1-2 combo of empathy and authority. I come from story brand world, if people are familiar with Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And that's like when you talk about being a guide in the story and like really positioning yourself appropriately, it's empathy then authority. And I think the same thing's true when you're doing any kind of content, but especially podcast interviews.
Agreed. Well, and speaking of framework, if you're listening and you're like, okay, I want to start guesting, how do we even start to look for podcasts we might want to be on?
Yeah. So I'll quickly hit, like, we have a 5-step framework we take people through, and people typically start asking questions at steps 2 or 3, and which is exactly what you just did. And I think it's very natural. But there's a step before that. So my framework's just like 5 P's. It's super simple. I'll say them and I'll go back through them real quick. It's purpose, plan, pitch, perform, profit, or maybe non-profit in some organizations. But
it's still
the
profit.
First step is purpose. And that's actually getting really clear on why. Like, why do I want to be on a podcast? Like, what are my goals? What are the things I'm trying to drive with this? Who am I trying to speak to? And what transformation do I provide with my work, with my organization, right? And so that's kind of a deep question, but it's really important because most people they skip the purpose part and they go straight to step 2, we call plan, or it's kind of like the research, like, okay, which shows do I want to be on? Well, you got to answer that question, but it's really hard to answer it strategically if you haven't done step 1, which is understand more deeply why you're wanting to do it in the first place and what results you're trying to drive. But step 2 is plan. Step 3 is pitch. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this a little more today too. Once you find the podcast, which I'm going to go back and answer your question, Sammy, on how you find them. But once you do find them, well, you have to actually get on them, right? You have to compel the host to say, hey, look, I have stories to tell and I have value to provide. And like, here's why I would be a great guest. So that's step 3, which is pitch. Step 4 is perform. So congratulations. They said yes. You've got a calendar link to come record an interview. Like, what are you going to talk about? Like, what stories do you want to tell? What's your call to action at the end of the interview to make sure it's driving the results that you set up in step 1, which was your purpose for doing this. And then finally, step 5 is profit. So in most of my clients' world, they're entrepreneurs, they're building businesses, and the step 1 purpose is often, leads, sales, revenue. Now, nonprofit, it would be the same thing: fundraising, awareness,
Mhm.
investment, board membership, those sort of things. They have different purposes, but basically the same process. So the step 5 is all about leveraging each opportunity to really double down and drive home your goals, right? So in the entrepreneurship world, that's like, okay, now we've got all these podcasts going. Like, how do we build a marketing flywheel effect from it and really drive, exponential growth for our business? So when we work with people in a 90-day program, about the first 30 days is the first 4 of those P's. So that's like really getting the system set up. And we actually spend 2/3 of our time on the 5th step, which is like, it's not just about getting on the right shows and telling the right stories. That's really important and foundational. But then you need to do things after that to really drive the results in the biggest way. So that's the framework, the 5 P's. Would you like me to kind of step back into step 2 now and talk about how to find the right shows?
Yeah, and I want to touch on kind of the purpose piece, because I think a lot of times we don't kind of think outside the box. Like, there's podcasts on absolutely everything. So I
Yes.
think even as you kind of jump into your research, I would just challenge people to think through, like, if you're an if you're working to solve food scarcity, you might start very niche in like where you actually like the part of the problem that you solve, but also like really, I think understanding who your target audience is based off of that. Like, you might then instead, like, you might talk to some podcasts that are like parenting podcasts because you're trying, or healthy eating, or like there might be some things that aren't directly related necessarily to food scarcity, but their audience is the people that you want to target to help you solve, like, to continue to increase impact. I know I'm not saying this very eloquently, but I just think I love that you said you started with purpose, because I think that can really help you as you go into the research phase to be a little bit more creative with the types of podcasts that you look for to guest on.
Yeah. So when we unpack purpose with people, one of the first things we do is like help them. We through prompts we help them create like a 3-year vision, or a vivid vision, some people call it, right? Like, what do I ultimately want for, if it's your business or your nonprofit, like the thing you're focused on growing through podcast guesting, like, where do I ultimately want this to go? And
Yeah.
it's really hard to think ultimate in terms of anything past 3 years, but 3 years you can be pretty very, very concrete, and like, what's my life look like? How does my business or nonprofit serve that? And so that just sets like a focal direction, like a focal point for alignment. Then you can back down into that, like, okay, what can I do this year through podcast guesting to drive those results? And then, like, what can I do in the next 90 days? This just teaches you much more clear in the moment. So that's kind of one part of it, is what do you want? And then the other
Mhm.
part is, more importantly, what do your clients want, right?
Mhm.
So we do like a before and after transformation exercise where you really get very discreet and get very real emotional words and things about how your clients feel before they meet you, and how do your clients feel after they get to fully work with you and experience your transformation. And so
Yeah.
that's important because that gives you a lot more clarity on, like, okay, those people that I want to serve, now that I know them, I've named them, I understand them, then it's way easier to find out where they are, right?
Yep.
Because it's kind of hard to have a target if you don't, like, have a bullseye if you don't have a target. So,
Yep.
but yeah, so once we do that though, the transition we would make into step 2 really gets actually just the example you're just giving, Sammy. It's so what most people do, which is incorrect and really messes up the results, is they'll say like, "Oh, I'll just use an example." So my very first online business was in the marriage niche. So say you're a marriage coach. So like, you help couples with communication, and you're a marriage coach. So you're like, hey, I want to grow my business. So you would think, hey, I want to go get on shows and I'm going to like be interviewed about marriage coaching. Well, the problem is the people hosting shows about marriage coaching are usually marriage coaches, and so it's a direct competition, right? So you're looking
Mhm.
for areas to collaborate, not compete. And so what I would do in that case, is look for, like, it's kind of like a Venn diagram, right? There's what you do and there's what the host does, and you want overlap, but not like complete overlap, right? And they also
Yep.
don't want to not be have those circles not touch, because then you're not going to go talk about healthy eating on marketing podcast, right? So you got to have some overlap, but not too much. And so a really easy way to find those alignment areas is really two questions that people can think about. So what causes the problem that you solve? So, what are like the root causes of the thing that you help people with? And what are the symptoms or what are the results when people have it? So in the marriage example, the thing I like to do is actually work with married couples on their communication, but it does not make sense for me to go be on marriage shows. So what would I be on? Well, what causes people to have problems in their marriage and in their communication? Well, there's lots of triggers for that, right? Like one would be being a first-time parent, right? Yeah. So anyone who's been married a while and you have your first kid, you realize it changes the dynamic of your household and it can create a lot of marriage problems. So maybe I become a marriage coach, but I go get featured on parenting podcasts or first-time parenting podcasts, right? And I'm coming in as a expert on the communication within a marriage. That's not going to compete with the host, who's probably more of a parenting oriented coach or doctor or whatever, right? So that's one example of what causes marriage problems. The other would be like, what are some symptoms that arise when people are having marriage problems and they're having communication problems? Well, one big one that comes to mind for me is personal finance problems, right? Like people have problems managing their money if they don't talk to each other. And so maybe you're the marriage coach and you go get on personal finance podcasts and you talk about the importance of having a common vision and goal setting. And so you're not competing with like the CPA or the financial advisor who's maybe hosting these shows. You're actually coming in as an adjacent expert to serve a portion of their audience with your own story and your own teaching. And so for those of us who are old enough to remember Oprah, I kind of call this the Oprah effect, right? Like Oprah had a massive audience. So this is like a very mega example of this. But if you imagine Oprah had this audience and, they loved Oprah for certain Oprah things. But what did Oprah do? She actually brought in tons of guest experts, right? And she actually launched the careers of people like Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, Susie Orman, Rachel Ray, like all these people that we now know as household names. They actually got started by coming on Oprah's platform. But they weren't competing with Oprah. They weren't trying to be Oprah. They were coming to talk about their little niche topic that some of her audience would find really interesting. She had enough of an effect that they actually created entire brands from that. But like, if you think of mini Oprahs that you can be like, oh, like there's a portion of their audience that would love the thing I love to talk about. Those are the people you want to reach out to, because you're adding to their show, not trying to compete with it. So I know it's kind of a long answer, but I hope that gives people good examples to work with in their own head.
No, I think it's great. And I think the other thing about it is that, and we'll talk about pitching next, because I think this for me is where people go south real quick. Yes. But it makes the pitch easier because you kind of know about like the reasons why you're going on the show, like how you can add value to that person. But also it makes it easier for you as the guest, because if you can line out kind of some of these avenues, you're basically doing the same. It's like your signature talk, right? So if you are in the speaking circuit live on stage, you're probably giving the exact same speech at all of these different locations, right? And you can do the same with podcasting. So by getting hyper clear on that at the beginning, you don't have to come up with different topics for every single podcast that you want to go on. You know, this is the value that I'm going to provide that's going to work across all these different categories. And maybe you have one or two different ones that you talk about, but it just makes everything easier.
It does. Yeah. It makes it, because you kind of have that, like you said, kind of the 3 to 5 bullet points. Like, these are the things I'd love to talk about on your show. And we'll talk about the pitch next. So like that basically gets recycled, right? As long as you stay in the same target market, you can talk about the same things. And it's not boring, even as the guest, because I don't know how many times I've talked about the 5P framework, probably 50 times, 100 times. I don't know. And I've talked about it from stage. I've talked about it on a podcast. But it's not boring because of the format of interviews. It's always different, right? Because like your audience is a little different than the last audience, and Sammy has different ideas, and she's going to riff on different parts of this than someone else would. And so being a subject matter expert and knowing that you can talk about these core teaching concepts, like that's what I think makes it so uniquely fun to be a podcast guest, because it's also human to human. It's not like me just reading it. It's not like I'm reading out of a textbook. It changes each time because the dynamic of the conversation changes.
Love that. Okay, so once we kind of have our list pulled together, And we've done our research. I do want to make sure we spend a little bit of time on the pitch because I get pitched several times a day, and my podcast isn't the biggest
Yeah.
podcast out there. So if you're really trying to get in with some of the big ones, I mean, I get some awful pitches that are just like, "Hey, saw your podcast. It looks great. I think I could add a ton of value. Let's chat." Like literally
Yeah.
that's it. And those immediately get deleted and ignored, and I'm not even like like looking at those. So um kind of how do we want to approach the pitch, and what things are kind of critical to include in those conversations?
Yeah, I think we all kind of know what not to do, right? Because we all, no matter
Yeah.
before I even had a podcast, I got pitched, right? I've had
Right.
several different brands online, so I've got, and it's LinkedIn DMs and it's
Yeah.
emails and it comes from all, Facebook messages. So yeah, we all know it's not like hi and then like the first name's in a different font. Like I really
Right.
love your work. I want to be on your show. So we're not doing that. So the way I like to look at pitches, and I'll talk about it first as like how to create a master pitch. So just think of this as a master pitch in email format. We can talk after this is created about different ways to use it. It doesn't always have to go out as a one single
Mhm.
full email, but it's great to create that first. And so it's really three parts. Part one is a relational anchor, and that's going to get customized to every pitch. The middle part, which is the bulk of the email, is the like what's in it for the person receiving it, right? Like how can I give value to your audience in the case of a podcast? And so those are those like 3 to 5 bullet points that you're going to keep using over and over because they're going to be your key teaching topics. And those are going to be copywritten. So if you have a little style to them, a little curiosity, you can like use numbers, you can name processes just to make them stand out and sound more attractive. But that middle part of the email is basically recyclable, which is awesome because it's the hardest part to get right the first time. And then the final part's really simple, and that's a clear call to action. So like, and I like to use, are you interested? So I'm like
Mhm.
pitching them on my ideas. Are you interested, Dustin? Are you interested? It's kind of a beautiful way to close an email because it's really easy to say yes to, and you can say yes to it
Mhm.
in multiple ways. Like I am, reach out to me in a month, or I am, fill out this form, or I am, let's book a discovery call, or I am, let's do it. So there's lots of
Yep.
ways. But telling someone you're not interested at all after they put a very thoughtful, compelling pitch together, we get 60 to 80% acceptance rates, and it's because we're being thoughtful. We're also being very intentional on who we're reaching out to, and we have these three elements. So I kind of talked about the middle element and the closing, and we can talk more about those. But I think the part that really trips people up is the first part, which is the relational
Mhm.
anchors. And so relational anchors
Yeah.
basically, you're not a random weirdo from the internet. Like you actually know something about me, and it doesn't have to be deep. It's not like it can actually get creepy if you get too deep with it. But it doesn't take long to. And we train people. We actually train people. We train virtual assistants for people to do this for them after they've
Mhm.
created the master pitch. So when I start describing this, if you're a busy professional, don't be like, "Oh my gosh, I'll never do that." You need to do it once and like get it right so it's in your voice, and then we can help other people do this on your behalf in the way that we do this work. I just say that as kind of a disclaimer, like this is going to sound like you do this for every pitch. Yes, but we're only sending out a handful of pitches and then most of them say yes. So this relational anchor is, like I said, you're not a random weirdo from the internet. And then number two, it's really flattery and connection. So, and it's going to be custom for each podcast, but one of the go-to anchors is giving a thoughtful and real reflection on one of their
Mhm.
recent episodes, right? So, like, you look through the list of episodes and you find one that's like, that's a topic I actually care about, or hey, that's a story that sounds cool, or hey, I actually know that guest, or hey, I follow that guest, I've read their book, whatever, like something that's like a real connection. And you could say, hey, I'm so excited you interviewed Sammy recently on episode 301. I've read her book, it's made a huge impact in my life. And then you can transition into how you could serve the audience, right? But like a real connection, it could be like I've seen someone's LinkedIn profile, they're from Chicago, Illinois. Well, I'm from Southern Illinois, like not Chicago, but in Illinois. So it's like, hey, greetings from Southern Illinois. Like
Mhm.
immediately they know, like, oh, this person knows something about me. It's not just completely cold random email, but that it could be. I've used like someone I knew the host was an engineer who became an entrepreneur. Well, that's my story too. So it's like, hey, I'm a fellow engineer turned entrepreneur. Well, people aren't going to ignore that because that's like, oh, I'm going to lean into that, right? Like that's interesting. But if you don't know anything about them, you don't spend any time on LinkedIn, you don't actually listen to an episode, you can still go through the show notes and pick out a true compelling connection that you share an interest with, a connection with, etc. So that first part's customized to each message. It's a little bit of work, but it drives huge results. And I constantly get feedback, not only from me, but now from clients who do this. People will respond back to this, like host, and be like, this is the best pitch I've ever received.
Mm-hmm.
Or I ignore 99% of these types of emails, but you really hooked me in with this opener, And so it's simple. It's like probably usually 2 lines, like as an opener. Then we transition into here's who I am and what I do, and like 1 line. And then it's like, here's how I think I could really add value to your audience. And then it's these 3 to 5 bullet points. And then, are you interested?
Well, okay.
That's,
Can I back
it's
up?
pretty simple.
Can I back up to
Yeah.
the intro piece real quick? Because I think this is where like your research and your purpose also comes back in and is so critical, because I'll get pitches that I can tell are being mass produced. So they're following a similar format to what you're sharing. They'll call out my podcast. They'll say, oh, I really liked episode whatever, that, like they will give me like a one-liner, but then where it falls flat is then the pitch that they're giving me is not even my audience. So I'm immediately like, if you actually listened to my podcast and didn't just pull out or like even looked at the show notes briefly, like you would know I talk to nonprofits, and you're talking to me about like 7-figure entrepreneurs who are trying to like scale and grow. Like there's no alignment there. So I think to your point, it does take extra time, but it's so worth it, because I agree. When I get those that I can tell they've looked at my podcast, I can tell they know who my audience is, and they're giving me topics so I don't have to think about it. That is a win-win, but just make sure that your research is backing up that purpose. Otherwise, they're not going to close.
Yeah. So you need to look at the episodes. The other thing you can do in the same screen, in the same moment in like Apple iTunes, as an example, is on the left side, you'll see the host summary of their show, right? Like this show is for nonprofits, so then even if you're like typically talking to marketing shows or business shows, maybe your bullets are very oriented towards that. Like, hey, how to double your profits. Well, you would need to tweak it in that case, because that's going to turn you off. So you might say, how we take a strategy usually applied to for-profit businesses and let nonprofits use it to improve their fundraising, right? So that would be like a bullet point modification. The other thing I would say, like, I didn't pitch Sammy because we have a mutual friend who made this connection. And by the way, once you get in this rhythm and you do some of these cold pitches and you get some success, I haven't written a pitch in 2 years, because the momentum kind of carries itself and people start referring you, and you become the authority and people start asking you to come on the show. That sort of thing happens. But we're talking about like when you're first getting started, how do you do this effectively? My point was, if I was pitching Sammy, I'm thinking relational anchors just on the fly right here. For, knowing that we have a mutual friend who's been a guest on this show, I would reference that. But if I didn't even know that, I would say, oh, she does nonprofit work. And I would, with full sincerity, say, like, I work mostly with entrepreneurs, but I have a real passion for nonprofit work. My wife's on the board of a local pregnancy resource center, and I've worked with them on their marketing. Like, now it's like, oh, okay, this guy is kind of admitting like he's not a nonprofit consultant, but he does have a true connection to it, right? Like, I've helped them. My wife's on the board, and I'm on the board of a nonprofit that I could mention too. But the point is, don't make sure you're actually paying attention to who their audience is. And customize appropriately.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Okay, well, I want to touch on kind of one last piece to this before we kind of wrap this up. And that is, you might feel really comfortable and ready to go, and your topic. But how important, and how should we prep for kind of that? Because I feel like a lot of people sometimes fumble at the end when it's like, okay, well, how can people connect with you, or how can people learn more or continue to work or learn more about your organization? Like, we kind of want to have that response like really locked and loaded. We want to know where we're sending people to. Like, kind of what are your best tips for creating that call to action at the end to kind of to see that engagement, to kind of lead into that profit side at the end of your framework?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, clear call to action, right? Like, so when you get to the end of the episode, I mean, probably like step 1B. So like step 1 is the purpose and like, hey, well, who do I want to serve and how do I want to serve them? And if you've got like your offer, and again, offer could mean for profit, it could be, whatever the goals you're trying to drive with your nonprofit, or maybe you're trying to sell books, like whatever your goal is, what's the like mini step towards that goal that you can provide that gives people real value? And that makes a great next step and call to action. So once you know what that thing is, and sometimes, that's a whole episode in and of itself, as I'm sure, as Sammy knows, is like, it could be a simple checklist, it could be a PDF, it could be a video, it could be an assessment, it could be a lot of different forms. But the important thing is it leads the audience the audience who is interested in learning more about what you do and perhaps working with you, or serving your organization. How can you give them just like a bite-sized piece of value that is independently valuable, but also then leads them to want to go even deeper? Because the reality is, people listen to you on the podcast, 90+% will remain invisible forever to you. Like, you're anonymous. I'm never going to know most of the people who hear this, Sammy. But for the ones that are like, I think podcast guesting is actually something we should pursue, I want to know more. Well, I'm going to give them, and I'll demonstrate this in a second, I'm going to give them one clear next step. Like, hey, if you want to go do more, go do this thing, and make that thing a very easy to remember URL, typically, right? Like, a website name, in other words, right? So it's very clear. It's easy to remember. Many people listening to podcasts are driving or running or doing other things. And of course, the host will put it in the show notes. But if you can make it memorable, it's way better. But the main problem I see with most people is they either don't have a good one. Like, it's like no one wants it. So like, that's not going to work. But it could be the juiciest thing ever that people really want. And if you make it one of 5 potential things they could go do, then like no one's going to do anything, because there's, the decision fatigue. It's like, oh, I can't remember. There's like 5 different things he said I could do. I guess I'm just going to go back to, looking at TikToks. Like, I don't know exactly what to do, and it has to be very clear and have it be one thing. So
I love that. And I think that is critical in general in any marketing that you're doing, right? We tend to overcomplicate and want to like word vomit all of the amazing things we do. Nonprofits are notorious for this. I say this all the time. And the goal is really just to get people to be more excited and want to learn more. You'll have time to do that if you can keep it simple. But if you complicate it, like you said, then you lose it and you miss that opportunity. So I think that's great. One kind of last question on that is, when you are doing your call to action, do you have, and this is definitely more diving into the weeds a little bit than maybe we need to go, but do you do like a separate URL? Like, for all of when I'm guest podcasting, I have one URL that I use just for my podcast. And then I have a different URL that I use like maybe on my paid advertising, even if it's all driving to the same place, so that you can kind of track activity there, or as you're kind of trying to see what avenues are working for you and not, do you just keep everything the same? Kind of, how do you approach that?
yeah, I typically keep it the same, to your point, for podcast guesting, right? So basically, and I try different ones, so it varies. But if I have one that I know works well, I'm probably just going to use the same one 80%, 90% of the time. The exception would be if I do get like a really big opportunity. So that I'm like, I want to kind of pull it out separately. Then like from a tactical standpoint, I would probably clone the landing page, give it a different URL, so that I can track it specifically. And so as an example, for me, I was on a show called Digital Marketer, and it's a company I kind of grew up with and admired. As a very full circle moment. They have a sizable audience. And so I took the same lead magnet that I typically, or call to action that I typically provide, and I just made it like sevenfigureleap.com/DM instead of like playbook. And so DM for digital marketer. So that does a couple things. For one, it makes it more trackable. 2, it makes the audience feel like this is a custom gift for them. And then for me, like on that page, I had a banner at the top. This is a thin banner. It's like, welcome fellow digital marketer fans or whatever. Right. So like they felt like, oh, this is one of us. And so I did that. I've done that for several larger shows, but in general, I use the same one just for simplicity's sake. Because while, I'm a marketer, I'm an engineer before that. Of course, I love tracking, but the reality is this is a game of very loose attribution, meaning like when I get clients for our flagship program and I start talking to them, it's usually a conversation like, well, I think I heard you on a podcast, and then I started following you on LinkedIn, and then I got on your email list, and then so and so mentioned you. And so it's like, it's not that tight to be able to say, like, it's not that important, I should say. Like, how many did I get? 12 or 22 or 42 leads from this one podcast? In most cases, it doesn't really matter. So that's why I just keep it simple, because otherwise, if I knew I had to like create a custom landing page for every show and have a new URL, I would with URL, and two, I would just like not be as excited about going and doing the guesting, which is the most important part of it, because I'd be overcomplicating the process beyond that. So
I love that. Okay, well, if you're not convinced to start guest podcasting by now, then you're kind of crazy. Go out and do it. Try it. Have fun with it. I know I'm harsh with my audience sometimes, because I think we also tend to overcomplicate some of these new things, and it can really start just with a simple conversation with some of your favorite podcasts and just maybe test the waters. But I love your framework. I love what you shared, and kind of your approach with the story first. I think that's fantastic. But if people want to connect with you more, Dustin, how do they do that?
I feel this pressure because I'm like, now I have
know
to do
you
the call to
better
action really
close
well.
it.
Just made a big deal out of it. No, so yes, I do have a resource for people if they're like, I'm curious about guest podcasting. I'm not exactly sure how we would get started or what goals we would want to establish for our organization. I have a playbook. It's got like a calculator in there about what this can do for your organization. It's got some case studies that will give you some very clear examples to follow. And it really breaks down that framework in more detail so that you could see exactly step by step what to do to actually get started. And so my company is called 7-Figure Leap with a P. And so 7figureleap.com/playbook is the place to go to get that. It's free. So 7figureleap.com/playbook is my single call to action. And of course, from there, you can find me and get on socials and all that stuff, get on our newsletter. But the main thing is, do get the free playbook. And if you're just curious about this, or if you're like, I've tried this, but I haven't been able to do it and drive the results I want, I think that playbook will unlock a lot for you. So.
Yeah, and we'll have all the social media links and the link to that playbook in the show notes at thefirstclick.net/261. So that'll be easy for you to grab there as well. Dustin, this was a wonderful conversation. I still have so many questions, so we may have to have you come back and do like another deep dive onto some of these other topics, because I know we just scratched the surface here. But thank you so much for being a guest today.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. It's my honor, and be happy to come back. It's like, this is one of those topics that people are like, I got 15 minutes. Let's talk about podcast guesting. I'm like, well, I can teach you for 90 days straight about, like what to do with it. So there's a lot more here. But yeah, but I love the opportunity to be here, share with your audience, and just encourage everyone to keep up the good work they're doing in the world.
Okay, so which part are you most excited about? Figuring out kind of how you can make the most out of guest podcasting, starting to research the podcast that you want to be on, kind of jumping into the topics that you want to talk about, whatever it is. I know that there's going to be takeaways from this episode that you'll be able to come back to over time as you kind of work through the process of guesting on podcasts. The show notes for this episode are at thefirstclick.net/261, and there you can find all of Dustin's information as well as the playbook that he mentioned. For now, please make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave us a review if you don't mind, and share this podcast with another nonprofit organization that you know could use some support in their digital marketing strategies. For now, I really appreciate you choosing to listen to Digital Marketing Therapy. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.